Welcome, everyone, to Plexus Blogcast Numero Trace. My name's Jared, and I'm here with Matt, and we're here to talk about what we're going to write about, what you're going to read about. Don't forget, if you ever want to read the blogs, of course, there will probably be more detail there, and we'll kind of flesh out some of what we talk about. But for those of you who can listen, we're here.
Yeah. So this week's blog is about hiring and interview tips and tricks. So Jared, as our resident business leader here, he does the hiring and interviewing. So wanted to ask him, what is your process for hiring employees?
So never my favorite thing. So I'll start with, if you're out there and you're thinking, I don't love to hire or fire, then that's okay. So the biggest thing I had to do was when I was first starting, so for startup kind of people, I would really reach into people I knew. I would ask for referrals. I was shameless. You gotta be. Look for, you're definitely looking for character and personal qualities more than ever at that point. And
Right.
so if you're not just a startup, then kind of that initial thing is you might be phasing into something like using ZipRecruiter, Indeed, or I'm sure there's other ones. I actually used Craigslist at one point early on. That didn't go well.
I can imagine not.
No, it didn't. But Indeed is what I use now.
Okay.
Not by, I mean, just because they sent me a free $50 and it was the first thing I used, and so I'm familiar with it. So not meant to be a plug, but it works for me.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, kind of talking about the journey from starting and new and figuring it out, even trying Craigslist.
Yep.
But then kind of maturing and growing into that. What would you say is your kind of like number one tip when it regards to interviews?
Don't hesitate to follow your curiosity. Have pre-populated questions. I have a page of just a ton of questions that are pre-populated. I have no formula as to which one I kind of go to. I'll jump around. If they say something that perks your curiosity, don't be afraid to pull on that thread. If they say something you're nervous about, definitely pull on the thread.
Right.
Kind of see where it goes. A lot of times people will say something and you assume you know what they were saying,
Right.
and you don't ask enough questions. And a lot of mistakes can be avoided by kind of pulling on that thread. And you could also make sure that to not lose somebody that actually might have been a great hire.
Right. So don't be afraid to ask more questions, explore more.
Yeah. And don't ask questions you don't need to ask. I mean, you're wasting everybody's time.
Right.
Let them talk. It's a great time that if you hear your voice more than theirs, you didn't do a good job.
Right. That's a good
So 70-30 is probably a fantastic ratio.
Of you talking 30% and listening 70.
Yeah. That's probably the main tips I would throw at anybody who's new.
Right. Which makes sense because your main goal is to get to know that person. And if so, you want to let them talk because that's when people's personalities, their interests, their quirks will come out in those when they're talking.
I believe it's coined by Brene Brown, but she says lean into the discomfort. That's fantastic for interviewing, including silence. Silence is your friend.
Right.
You got to shut up for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, sometimes 15 seconds and just let the silence sit there while people think.
Right.
And somebody sitting there quietly is not a sign of being slow or it just means maybe you have to read their body language, right? Body language matters now. It's a sign of authenticity or it's a sign of non-authenticity. So you just got to get comfortable with the person and try to get to understand who they are and what they care about to then understand their body language also.
Right. That makes sense. And what do you think about, made me think of, what do you think about following your gut when it comes to interviews? I feel like that could be maybe a two-edged sword.
So there are definitely people who will do that, and I'm all for it. I've made the call going with my gut multiple times, and it panned out really well. I also didn't listen to my gut and hired people I shouldn't have hired that didn't pan out well.
Right.
Now, when I say that, though, I'll preface it with I do everything very organized. I have my questions. I have a 3-part process. I do personality profile tests on people. So when I say go with my gut, I really mean educated guess more than I mean go with my gut.
Right.
You can't always express that. I mean, the very term educated guess is the idea that you're turning to a series of events of experience that you've garnered,
Right.
and you're making sometimes something you can't verbalize, a very educated gut call about a situation or a person, and sometimes the brain goes really fast.
Right.
And you have to go fast with it and be comfortable with that, even though you can't verbalize it. So I would never say, somebody walks in across the parking lot and I shake their hand and I'm not going to go with my gut. Well, my gut told me the way I shook hands with this person, they were good. And I mean, people will say stuff like that. Like I knew the moment they walked in. I'm like, I hope you didn't get married that way, you know? So that's what I mean by educated guess.
That makes sense of kind of not just the gut or just the mind, but it's the both. It's the taking into account both what logically makes sense that you can explain, but also is the feel right too? When you have both, that's probably the best decision.
Totally got it. And then the other big thing there is like I said, I make very small tweaks to my process so that I can rely on those experiences being consistent. So if I interviewed every single person differently, constantly, and was never had a written out set of questions to pull from, it would be harder to make that information useful.
Right. Because you can test something if every time it's different. Yeah. Because then you have nothing to compare it to. So that makes sense. So something good about the consistency of, okay, these are the questions I ask so that you can learn from your own experiences.
That's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jared. I feel that enlightened me about the hiring process. So I hope you guys found that helpful too. And like you said, read more in our blogs that go along with this.
I hate to be that guy on the doorknob. I'm going to throw one last huge tip out there.
Doorknob confessions are the best.
Doorknob confessions. This is a problem I think we have more than ever. And today, you can read all sorts of really in-depth articles. I just recently read one from fancy people at Harvard. And that is basically an analysis and description about basically, how do you word it? They have 1,000 pages, so it's much easier for them. Long story short, we make requirements that we don't really need. I say you need a college degree. Do you really need a college degree for this job? Potentially not. If I say you need a high school education, did that person really need it? If I say you need to have 3 years sales experience, was that a real requirement? So you have an issue with genders here. So like some ridiculous number, 80%, 70%, 90% of males will ignore requirements, whereas only like 10, 20, 30% of females will apply for a job. So there's a lot of other people who've talked about these subjects.
Interesting.
Easy to dive deep. So I'm not going to like try to be the expert on this topic so much as in point out to people. You want to put the least amount of requirements. I personally, even for my most advanced jobs, put education as a plus and appreciated. I love
not
education.
A requirement.
It's not a requirement. At the end of the day, when people have been polled, one thing's very clear. Valid work experience means more to an owner or a hirer than anything.
Makes
so
sense.
If that's the case, then make sure that you're putting out a job description that encourages people to apply. That may be great for this job. That may not meet the requirements.
Good. That was a great doorknob confession. Thank you, Jared. We'll see you next time on the Blogcast.